we realized that if we want to deal properly with corruption, we need to have a multi-pronged strategy. I know people are waiting for action. People want to see, so many people say to me, we want to see people in orange overalls. What they don't realize is that it will happen, but when we do it, we must make sure we get it right. Because those that are arrested, those that will be arrested, will certainly hire the most competent silks. Maybe your firm of attorneys might be also hired to defend them. People that will pay a lot of money to and make lots of lawyers very rich in fighting these cases.
That's our conversation for tonight. Well, good evening and welcome to Unfiltered on SABC 3 and Channel 404. I'm Desiree Chauge. Today, Treasury announced it had set aside a 20 million budget for the services of 4 senior counsel. That's Advocate Tembaka Ncqukaitobi, Wim Trengove, Ngoako Maenetje and Geoff Buddlender to help the National Prosecutions Authority's investigative directorate in prosecutions specifically related to state capture. This is yet another development since we heard last week that the Justice Department, headed by Minister Ronald Lamola, was working with the US State Department in a decision to sanction the Gupta brothers and all their financial activities in that country. Also last week, we reported on the raids of properties of former Ethekwini Mayor Zandile Gumede and independent newspaper boss Iqbal Surve. Now, is this a sign that the wheels of justice are finally turning on corruption in South Africa? That's a question we're asking you tonight, and we'd like you to interact with us on our social media platforms. Remember, you can join us on Facebook using the hashtag at SABC News Online and SABC News Unfiltered, and on Twitter as well. Now let's welcome our guest. Professor Gwandiwe Gondlo is with the Department of Politics and International Relations at the University of Johannesburg. He also teaches international political economy. Tembaka will be joining us later. He wrote an article, The Age of Corruption and Deceit, and we'd like him to unpack that for us. He's the chairperson of the Strategic Advisory Consultancy, Corporate SA. We're also joined in studio tonight, not on Skype, by David Lewis, the Executive Director at Corruption Watch. Let me welcome both of you. Thank you so much for making it tonight.
Thanks, thank you.
All these developments I mentioned in the introduction of the show tonight, is it a sign that the wheels of justice are turning, David Lewis?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it was a Good Friday, I think. It's not the first sign, but they are quite decisive developments. I think, you know, one that you forgot to mention is that Zuma will now stand trial. So there are a number of developments that, yes, I do think speak to that. I mean, I think the ground for this has been laid over a long period, and it's still going to be a while before we see anybody going to jail. But yeah, these are good developments.
Professor Kondlo, your thoughts?
Yes, I think the wheels of justice are turning, but like many of us, especially in poor communities out there, feel, we still think the wheels of justice are turning, but quite slowly. But we hope that even though they are slow, they will be thorough. The problem is that at the end of the day, something has to be done. We have witnessed the looting badly of the South African state-owned entities. That's why the economy is actually in dire straits. And people out there looking for employment, poverty is hitting a number of communities. In fact, many communities are on the brink of despair, whilst the elites are busy setting committees, setting panels. People are really waiting for some decisive action they can see visibly that the state has really acted against corruption.
We heard recently from the Chief Justice Mogoeng that there were concerted efforts to undermine the work of the Zondo Justice. When in the fight against corruption, should we be focusing on the commission only, or should it be an overall general effort?
No, I mean, there's also absolutely no reason why prosecution should wait for the outcome of the commission. I'm sure the commission is providing interesting ideas and evidence to the prosecutors and the investigators. But there is no need to wait for the Commission to report. They're entirely separate processes, both of which have their legitimacy and their purpose. But it is one thing that we cautioned against right at the beginning of the whole Zondo Commission process, was that the prosecutor should not be waiting for that process to take its course. There's really no reason for doing so. But the commissions have been useful. The Zondo Commission, the Party Commission, the Mokgoro Commission, these have all played a very important role, and I think will continue to play an important role.
Professor Ncqukaitobi, I was talking just now about the announcement by Treasury of appointing those 4 legal counsel to come in and assist. And you're saying that there are all these committees and commissions that are being announced. In your opinion, what other avenues exist that the government can immediately make use of in the fight against corruption?
Look, I think, look, on the overall, government is doing the best it could, and the government is actually doing well. But as a citizen, sometimes I feel if government could develop very clear, short-term, results-oriented strategies, separate these from the more medium to long-term. Because really, like I say, people have lost a lot of confidence in politicians and even in state institutions. So some kind of quick, decisive interventions are needed. But at the same time, we cannot undermine the legal processes because, look, the law is the law, there is a constitution, so we all have to abide by it. We do have wishes as citizens to see something happening very quickly.
That has been the outcry up to now.
Yes.
All right, we're talking to Professor Nkqukaitobi. We're also talking to David Lewis. We're talking about the seemingly turning of the wheels of justice in the country based on recent developments in terms of tackling corruption. And let us know as well what your thoughts are. We'll take a look at some of those thoughts when we return from this break.
People also don't realize that it's not like the criminal justice system has been working so efficiently over the years that now that you have a new national director, the cases are just ready to take to court. You must understand that for years there was a deliberate attempt not to ensure that these cases were not investigated. There was nothing happening in these cases. And now that everyone's hearing about these things in all of the commissions, the public commissions, they think, why is the NPA not doing anything? When are people going to be arrested? People will be arrested. And I think people do want to also see that the wheels of justice are turning.
Exactly, that's the conversation tonight. Welcome back. You're watching Unfiltered. Let's take a look again at the social media interaction that you've sent through regarding this conversation. Anwar Chauhan saying, yes, there seems to be some movement in a positive direction. Koketo Tlabi saying, who's in jail for corruption so far? Anyone prominent? And we also have Martha Shingange. Let's start with state capture. Then we will be talking. Those are some of your thoughts. There are more of them online. We will be bringing them up later on in the show. But let's continue with our guest. The story that broke last week about the U.S. State Department putting sanctions on the Gupta brothers and all their financial activities in the United States. How can that help in this fight?
Well, I think it will concentrate the minds of those who are wanting to do business in the U.S. or in fact business with a U.S. company anywhere in the world. I mean, this is over for the Guptas. In fact, business is over for the Guptas. If you can't enter the United States, if you can't do business with a US-linked company, if you can't transact in dollars, you're finished as a business person. And so I think it should really make those who have ambitions to be in business, it should make them think twice about doing anything. It's a powerful sanction, and unlike the sanctions that Shamila Batoy is engaging in, it doesn't have to be proved before a court on a criminal standard of proof. The one question that I have about the US, the sanctions that the US have posed, is that the Zuma family and the Gupta family are absolutely inextricably linked. They're two sides of the same coin. So I'm kind of wondering when that family is going to suffer the same fate. But it's a very powerful sanction.
Prof, you're talking about the companies that are affected, companies that were so highly regarded, like McKinsey, Bain, Hogan Lovells. What creates a turnabout in companies such as those ones to say we've been ethical all along, we have been talking about high standards of leadership, and what makes them turn around and become involved in such activities?
You mean activities of corruption?
Yes.
That is
Perhaps in answering the question also, perhaps interrogate how far a reach the Gupta family had that we thought was only limited to South Africa.
Yeah, I think the issue of ethics is becoming so important, not only in political terms, but also in business leadership. And you see, with the case of the Guptas, America's response, the sanctions, basically shows that the world powers are still committed to order
good governance
in a global political economy. They are committed to maintaining order in global political economy. But of course, we cannot say they are maintaining order because they are against corruption. I still don't believe that America has really acted out of opposition to corruption. I still think it acted out of self-interest. Remember, in South Africa, we have close to or more than 600 American companies operating here. So America's sanction of the Guptas, I see it as flexing the muscle and also sending a message out there to emerging economies that, look, should you play corruption next to where America has interests, America won't hesitate to act. I think it's a message more than anything else. But it's going to hit the Guptas slowly but surely. And I'm interested to see whether at a certain point Mr. Zuma and his companies will not be affected by this. But we have to wait and see.
It also comes at an interesting time, David Lewis. You were mentioning that the Zuma court outcome was also one of the big stories for last week. How does this, he has over and again indicated that he's running low on funds in terms of affording access to legal assistance. How will this affect him and his operations, his business operations, as Professor Gondlo said?
I don't know how that this will affect him. Excuse me. That this will affect him directly. I mean, one thing that we can take from the Zuma prosecution is a message about how difficult Shamila Batoy's job is. I mean, here is an example of a Stalingrad strategy where, what has it taken? 20 years
Quite a while.
to begin the trial. And believe you me, we haven't heard the end of the legal tactics yet. But I don't think this outcome affects him directly, except, as I say, that he and his family have been so inextricably linked to the Guptas. I mean, this wasn't this wasn't the only state capture syndicate, but it was the most iconic one, and it involved the president of the country. Mm-hmm. And so I bet, his son and his sons and himself are wondering if they're not going to be next. I mean, the Americans have used this legislation quite often, and I think that we should have legislation of a similar type in this country. In fact, we've been speaking to the founder of the Magnitsky Act, the act under which the Americans took action, to see if we too can take action to prevent corrupt people from doing business in South Africa, from entering South Africa. And I think we should take a leaf out of the Americans' book on this one, because it is a very effective sanction. Obviously, more effective when a country the size and power of America uses it than we would, but we still it would have plenty of persuasive power if we had similar legislation to that.
Mr. Mila Batoyi mentioned something that has been an ongoing conversation about rich lawyers who make a buck out of these situations. I'd like you to put your mind to that conversation. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll touch on that. We are watching Unfiltered. Stay with us. We'll be back in a moment.
It would take a thoroughly bad individual, completely bereft of ethics that apply to the organized legal profession and the judiciary, to embrace corruption. Allegations have been made, not only that some judges have received money from CR17 or Bidvest, but also that the judiciary is corrupt. Mr. Natim Ngube showed me a tweet by someone who claims to have informed me of certain judges in the Free State High Court who have allegedly been captured by Mr. Ace Magashule, and that I did nothing about it. We've never received that information.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us. You're watching Unfiltered. We're having a conversation about recent events that make it seem like the wheels of justice are turning on corruption, and we're asking you, our viewer, is this really the case? We're now also joined by our third guest, Mr. Tembaka Ncqukaitobi. He's the strategic advisory. He's from the Strategic Advisory Consultancy Corporate SA. Thank you so much for coming through. You wrote an article called "Age of Corruption and Deceit," and you heard just now the Chief Justice saying that it's not really possible for people like judges to be corrupt because they get paid so well, and if there really is evidence, it should be coming forth. But you were saying in your article that senior crime intelligence officers are so consumed with fighting the governing party's political battles and hiding their own criminal conduct instead of discharging their own responsibilities. Are you saying that despite the huge amounts of salaries that senior officials get, they still get tempted to turn and look the other way?
Look, thanks, Desiree. It appears that greed knows no bounds in terms of salaries. Even when people earn decent salaries, they do somehow get to be easily swayed to look the other way when crime is committed, or even commit crime themselves. But that is no way to suggest that the judiciary itself does that, because I have no evidence, or I haven't heard of anything towards that extent to suggest that the judiciary themselves maybe
just unpack that article for us and what your gist was.
The core of that article was the reason why we see such rise in gender-based violence, the reason why we see so much crime happening is because those who are supposed to provide crime intelligence, which is one component of the SAPS, are not doing what they were supposed to be doing. Now we actually, the dots are getting, we're beginning to join the dots. I mean, after we're learning from what we get from the Zondo Commission, that the people who are supposed to be providing intelligence or doing intelligence work are not doing that. We're busy round-tripping, enjoying...
buying Louis Vuitton bags.
Yeah, absolutely, and buying themselves posh cars and stuff like that. And that is precisely the reason. And until we really sort out the SAPS, Southern Police Services, it doesn't matter what you talk about the economy, because we are going to find ourselves, people won't be able to enjoy themselves or to go and to restaurants at night or travel at night because you're scared because of the prevalence of crime. So that is the nub of the matter of the article, to say we really need to do something about the problems that are afflicting the SAPS, and until we sort it out, we are far from getting things right.
David Lewis, Tembaka Ncqukaitobi says in the article that in its current form, SAPS is an oxymoron. Do you agree?
Well, he said crime intelligence is an oxymoron. And crime intelligence is an oxymoron. I think that they've recently appointed a competent, experienced head to crime intelligence. But remember, the best known head of crime intelligence was Richard Mdluli, somebody who Zuma appointed within weeks of becoming president. It was one of the first big appointments that he he made. And he did that essentially in order to protect himself, because that was when he was starting to face criminal prosecution. And what has happened to crime intelligence is overwhelmingly responsible for crime in the country, not only for corruption but organized crime of every sort. And so, he has a lot to answer for. President Zuma has a lot to answer for the destruction of crime intelligence. But as it has stood for the last 10 years, Tembaka is absolutely right. Crime intelligence is an oxymoron.
Professor Kando, what can be said about the interference of the political side in terms of the discharge of government, specifically justice work?
Well, it depends really, because you see, if government intervenes, government can't intervene to break the law, you see. Government's intervention should be to provide support so that all that which the law is supposed to do is able to do it. So unless we refer really to specific cases where we are worried about government's involvement.
So in this bigger political fight, we have seen earlier one of the clips saying that it's the lawyers who make the money, the suits, they call them. What is the role of lawyers in the fight against corruption in the country? What are their interests? And perhaps I'll start with you, Tebo.
Yeah, certainly I think there's a great deal in which lawyers themselves can also play the role that they can play. First of all, I've noticed that most attorneys, especially those representing populist politicians or parties, tend to keep quiet when their clients utter disparaging statements against the judiciary. And I think it's about time that such conduct is reined in, and the lawyers are better suited as their clients to actually rein in such conduct. So this is not how you address judges, because they themselves are officers of the court. That's number one. And number two, we've seen lawyers who knowingly that this client, or who for a would have a reasonable apprehension that my client could be paying me from proceeds of the crime, happily accepting and perpetuating litigation, knowing full well that they're going to benefit from the proceeds of crime. I think it's about time that legislation somehow considers how to discourage that type of conduct by lawyers themselves. But certainly, I think there's a great deal that the legal fraternity itself can do to help mitigate white-collar crime, especially.
Yeah, thank you so much for your thoughts, and we're going to continue on this tack when we return. And it's at this time that we say goodbye to our SABC3 viewers. But if you'd like to continue engaging in this conversation, stay with us on SABC channel 404. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a moment.
South Africa has indeed made a request to about 8 countries across the world related to the Gupta families. And it is in relation to mutual legal assistance that we have requested, and we have sent. That included the United States of America, Canada, Dubai, India, Switzerland, and I think it's Mauritius. So it's a request that we've made to all the countries where we need some help with regards to the investigations that are being done by various law enforcement agencies in the country. And it is at a level where it is a country-to-country issue, which therefore means it needs the Minister of Justice to interact with the different countries across the world. And we're at that stage where we want to see an expedition of the matter across the world, including in Dubai and India.
Well, that's the Minister of Justice, Minister Ronald Lamola, adding once again to that conversation that we're asking you about tonight. Are the wheels of justice turning, and this is based on several events. Some of them happened last week. Today, Treasury announcing that it has put aside 20 million for the services of 4 legal eagles that will help specifically with cases coming out of the State Capture Commission. And I would like to welcome once more our guest, Professor Gwandiwe Gondlo from the University of Johannesburg, and also from Corruption Watch. Welcome, Mr. David Lewis, and also from Corporate SA. Welcome, Debo Khasi. Let's just quickly look at some of the tweets that have come through tonight. Mondli Mbele saying the wheel is not turning. One side maybe needs an alignment. Omangwena saying next, nothing, next, nada. It's all cheap talk, but no action. ANC government is only for themselves and their families and friends and are all untouchable. Nazim Khurudbo, my regular, saying, Desiree, no, until I see all the corrupt people behind bars. For now, it's still a cat and mouse play. Bebe Lovis saying corruption is powerful, then the wheels of justice in these country. I don't know what the den means, but yeah, people, you've been killed like chickens, children and women abuse take place every minute, every hour and every day. Why? The wheels of justice is weak, weak, weak. All we hear is bail, bail and more bail. Wendy Kakan is saying, Desiree, until we see those who've committed corruption called to account, I cannot agree that the wheels are turning. To this day, billions of rands have been wasted through personal enrichment. Personally, I wish to see recovery of every cent to rebuild poor communities. All right, that's the last one, and the one about the recovery of money, that story about the Guptas being sanctioned in the U.S. also going along that line, where the U.S. authorities are saying they're going to recover monies that have been put into the U.S. financial system illegally. But let's go back and bring in our guests once again, and we were having that conversation about lawyers. Professor Gondlo, some of the greatest leaders in the country have been legal eagles. You think of Oliver Tambo, you think of Nelson Mandela, you think of George Bezos. And there's this outcry now that lawyers are just out to make money. What is the role of lawyers in making sure that we stem corruption?
Lawyers have a big role to play, but at the same time, they are part of the system.
Not part of the problem. When
I say the system, I'm talking about they are part of the entire social formation in which we are. You see. And if you look at social formations all over the world, financialization has become so great and is creating too many problems. What do I mean by financialization? I'm talking about the dominance of financial interest and money in everything that a person does. So our lawyers come from that context. But the most important thing, which I think the lawyers like Madiba and the others could have done for us, was to make sure that our legal system is fundamentally transformed, or they set in process an agenda of transforming the logic of our legal system.
Like it's happening in most sectors.
Yes, because our legal system is very adversarial. Hence you see the competition. And the best lawyer who can act, and sometimes act in a populist way, he gets more clients after that. That's why this issue of lawyers competing now, not only to win cases on very reasonable, sound, ethical grounds, but competing now to get more clients and build empires.
David Lewis, is Shamila Batohi correct when she says sometimes the reason why it's seemingly taking so long is because they're wanting to be thorough so that they counter these lawyers who will come in, highly paid lawyers, and make sure that they defend their clients at all costs?
Well, they have to be thorough anyway. You know, if you're trying somebody and asking for him or her to be put in prison for 30 years, you need to be thorough to be sure that that what you're doing is the right thing. And she's also right when she says that despite all the evidence out there, the investigators who should be bringing this evidence to the prosecutors have not functioned for the last 10 years. You know, I don't often find myself defending lawyers, but I have to tell you that you know, we have benefited from the generosity of the legal profession considerably.
In your fights,
we have probably received, you know, something of the order of about 30 to 40 million rand over the years of our existence in pro bono assistance, including from some of the lawyers who have now been brought into the NPA. I mean, I think that where the law needs to be really tightened up, the law profession really needs to be tightened up, is that the law professional bodies need to be exercising a greater degree of discipline over their members. I mean, I have a real bee in my bonnet about firms who get into trouble and then who go out and get an impressive law firm and tell us that the law firm is doing an independent investigation. The law firm does the investigation, paid for by the people that they're investigating, and then doesn't make public the fruits of their investigation because their client doesn't allow that. That, I think, is an abuse of the law, and it should be tightened up by the profession. But the law is like everywhere else, you know, there are good journalists, there are bad journalists, there are good NGO people, there are good NGO people, and there are lawyers who really believe in the rule of law.
You're talking about how you've benefited sometimes, and one of those instances was the overturning of the Seriti Commission decision in court that will impact a lot on Mr. Zuma's court appearance going forward.
Sure, and Geoff Buddlender, who is mentioned there, was our senior counsel in
What will be the
matter.
role of Corruption Watch going forward?
You mean with respect to the law?
In terms of this particular case?
The Seriti Commission case.
The Zuma case.
I think, well, we are not involved in the Zuma case. I mean, this is a criminal prosecution, and only the criminal prosecutors can be involved in a case like that. The Seriti Commission case was an administrative review, what is called a judicial review. And so we can get involved in that. It's very difficult for people who don't possess the resources or the powers of criminal investigators to get involved in criminal prosecutions. But we'll watch it closely, and we'll publicize it, and we'll engage with the public about it. It's very important, and you know, the criminal justice system now has to come into play. The prosecution of the former mayor of Ethekwini is a very important prosecution, and you know, it's one that says, I think, much for the NPA. I mean, this is a powerful politician in a politically complicated part of the country, and yet they are pursuing this, by all accounts, pretty robustly, as is the asset forfeiture unit. And so I do think, you know, and as I say, it's not often that we praise the government, but I do think the wheels of justice are starting to turn, and one must give credit where it's due, but one mustn't relax one's vigilance. I think the point made very much earlier about selecting strategically cases where there can be quick wins is something I think that we should be expecting
to improve
from
public confidence.
The NPA, and I don't think we've really seen it yet.
All right, you're watching Unfiltered. We're talking about what seemingly is a movement from the side of the justice system in the country in terms of tackling corruption, and asking you what your thoughts are. Do you think the wheels of justice are turning? Let's continue with this conversation on the other side of this break.
Asset forfeiture, hugely important, because it's not just about putting people into prison, it's about bringing back the money. As I said, it is an insane amount of money that has been stolen by corruption.
Welcome back now, Mr. Khas. Assets forfeiture, will that help in recovering the confidence of the South African public in the system's ability to prosecute and also punish those who are seen to be corrupt?
Yes, certainly it does help, because the fear of losing the assets that you've acquired illegally itself makes you think that maybe the criminal conduct that you're doing is worthless if you know that any gains that you have amassed will be taken. Yeah, but because the wheels of the law, as David puts it, turn slowly. Those alleged to have committed misconduct, especially where huge amounts of monies are involved, such as the Guptas, they would have had a head start in terms of being able to hide the monies that they've accumulated illegally. I mean, if you look at the Guptas, I do not think
in places where they might never be recovered. Absolutely,
they'll be going to the safe havens like the Isle of Man or some tax haven elsewhere where there's complete secrecy in terms of who owns the account. It just becomes difficult because then they'll put a lot of hops before the asset forfeiture can even reach that. So the tentacles, as they needed to be spread outside of the boundaries of this country, it means there'll be more requirement for money, for funding for the asset forfeiture unit to be able to fulfill that mandate. But certainly in regards to those who are inside the country or within the republic itself, it's easier to go after them. But also it doesn't mean that everybody, they will be sitting on the money or the assets and will wait for them to come in and forfeit.
Just like the former Ethekwini mayor was saying last week that she is as poor as a mouse. Prof, when you look at the amounts that are being mentioned in these corruption cases, is the taking of their assets, does it justify the amounts that they've taken out of the system?
Desiree, it's not exactly equal to the amounts they've taken from the system. Well, sometimes, let me say, it varies, yes. But most importantly, I think the act of asset forfeiture, you see, it's also symbolic. I look at the symbolic meaning because, look, the message is that, look, as the government, we care about the money stolen from the public purse, and we are doing something about it. That is a very important message for me. But that message is contradicted by the framework of underlying politics in South Africa. Because you can have very good legal system, good lawyers, asset forfeiture, but the framework of politics which underlies everything in South Africa, be it the economy, is very bad. That is why this country, the people who are going to overthrow the ANC, it's not the DA, it's not the EFF, it's the citizens. They will come to that point where they stand up.
So, David, the sentiment that in the bigger scheme of things, Zandile Gumede is small fry, is that a consideration?
She doesn't seem to be. I mean, when you see the divisions within the KZN, ANC, and KZN generally.
That she's supposedly stalking.
She's. I mean, I don't know the politics of that region very well, but I don't think she's a small fry at all. It's a very, very important region for the ANC. It's a very fragile region for any politics, and at the moment the ANC control it. So I don't think it's small fry. I think in earlier years John Block was not small fry.
True.
And I think there are a number of people, in the sights of the prosecutors, and not least of all, as we know, Zuma himself, who are by no means small fry. But I acknowledge absolutely that for the people of this country, and really, the people of this country are united about few things, but I think this is one thing that they are united about, is that there have to be prosecutions to persuade them that government is doing something. And I kind of feel for Shamila Batoy, given the expectations that are placed upon her shoulders. But I think that they've got to be realized, and that's why I think that the advice here earlier, that they've select low-hanging fruit, and they are. I mean, I would think VBS is a fairly low-hanging fruit. I would think Estina Dairy is a low-hanging fruit. And I think that also one thing that all of them have in common, from the Guptas to the cigarette smugglers, is that they have tax problems. And you could put a whole lot of them away for a good few years just because they haven't declared and paid their taxes while you investigate the big money laundering cases and big corruption cases at your leisure while they're rotting in jail. And that's the kind of thing I think that they should be doing, is looking for the low-hanging fruit.
And just in terms of political analysis, Tembaka, what do you think the story of VBS is going to, how is it going to impact on the sustainability of a party such as the EFF?
Yeah, it's very saddening to see what is happening, because especially if you look at the profile of the EFF, how it projects itself as the vanguard of the poor, the vanguard of the worker, the downtrodden, and so forth and so forth. To be the very same people who actually go and steal from the poor that they purport to be representing. And I think with regards to the VBS, I would also mention that as one of the low-hanging fruits, in the sense that the evidence is out there. We've got Advocate Terry Mutawe having had a comprehensive report. We've got investigative journalism from Ama Bungani, Scorpio, and so forth, who've done excellent work, including today's revelations about one of the EFF leaders. What we now need is the authorities to be seen to be doing something about those low-hanging fruits, because it is the optics that also matter, because to the extent that people can see that here's what amounts to, at the prima facie, evidence that can be used or adduced before court to say this person has got a story, I mean, something to answer for, then certainly I think the NPA could be looking at such examples, instances as the ones to use to take to court to make sure that people's confidence in the system starts picking up again. Because I can tell you that the NPA, after the appointment of Shamila Batohi, has got a lot of outpouring of support. The euphoria is still there. It shouldn't taper off. And I think the one way to sustain that euphoria and the trust that it has amassed is to ensure that you start making sure that there's consequence management.
Let's just use the remainder of this program to talk about the specific either cases or reports or cases that are immediately prosecutable, or I'm thinking right now of, as an example, the turnaround at SARS and the work that Mr. Ncqukaitobi is doing there. How will it help in changing the perception about South Africa moving away from corruption? David Lewis, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the work that's being done at SARS is very important, but the damage that was done to SARS is incalculable. I mean, I think aside from the ANC, it may be the organization that was most damaged by state capture. And there's good reason for it. And I outlined the reasons just before the break, that all of them have tax problems. And so it became absolutely vital to capture SARS. And in order to capture SARS, the treasury had to be captured. And that proved in the end to be a bridge too far for the Zuma Gupta syndicate. It's ultimately what brought them down. But the destruction that has been caused to those two institutions, the treasury itself, but SARS in particular, is really vast. And I think what Ncqukaitobi is doing is, under his leadership is very, very important. But he faces the same sort of institutional degradation as Shamila Batohi faces. I can't remember the figure, but I think, something like, if I speak under correction here, but about 700 people have left SARS in the period of state capture. All of them the most skilled professionals in the organization. To make up for that loss is going to take some real doing. And that's why you see Shamila Batohi having to hire skills from the private sector. I'm sure that Edward Ncqukaitobi faces exactly the same challenge.
Professor Kondla, which area for you is that place that can really boost this sentiment that corruption is being dealt with? Could it be the cases, or could it be the commissions? The SARS Commission also had its own outcomes, the PIC Commission. Are you encouraged by its work?
Look, Desiree, I think this is going to need really an all-round sacrificial work. Like I said, that all-round sacrificial must be short-term, targeted, and punchy to boost the confidence amongst the people, to show that, first of all, senior public servants, even at universities actually, we're prepared not to get our bonuses or take a cut where necessary on salaries, to show that in the private sector there is commitment to make sure that workers don't lose jobs but are reskilled and sent to where they can be utilized more effectively. So this thing has to be all-rounded. We must all show sacrifice, and we must be part of this short-term intervention South Africa needs to boost confidence.
So recently we had a conversation here on the show where we were looking at the 100 days in office of President Cyril Ramaphosa, and we were looking at a range of conversations, but just specifically zoning in on corruption. How would you summarize his performance in the fight against corruption?
So far, I can't tell. But what I think seems to be happening with the green shots, the little green shots that we see, are actually encouraging. What will really tell is the day when we see the prosecuting authorities or the criminal justice system starts going after those responsible for VBS, Steenhoff, the state capture in all these formations, going after those who looted money from the Free State asbestos programs, because it is only once we start seeing action can then one be able to say, look, we do see some positive. But I think there is a lot that will unfold, and I think it is encouraging. The little that we see is encouraging. And if I may go back to that Zandile Gumede example, I think it is a sign that nobody within the ANC is beyond reach. In other words, nobody's untouchable. I mean, KZN as a province and Ethekwini as a region itself is the powerhouse within the ANC, because it's the biggest branch. I mean, the biggest region in the ANC. So to go and send out a message that nobody out there, even within my comrades, is above the law, I think it's a good start. Let's hope the momentum builds from there. And as tomorrow, President Zuma is now, I mean, his comeuppance has been going on for 15 years or thereabout. I think that will also be encouraging. These are some of the telltale signs that might boost the optics insofar as Ramaphosa's commitment to rooting out corruption, especially within the ANC itself.
Any encouraging signs that the president is earnest about his fight in this corruption scourge?
Ezra, we still don't know the reactions by the divided ANC to all what we see happening. You see, yes, definitely, Mr. Zuma. I know what he's going to do. The net seems to be closing in on him. He's gonna beat the drum of victimhood, beat the drum of victimhood, and the crowds are all going to come running. And the implications that for the ANC, which is so populist in orientation, we don't know how they're going to take it.
Mr. Lewis, your thoughts about how the president has been tackling the scourge?
I think he's done rather well. I mean, it's not only the wheels of justice that turn slowly, it's the wheels of government turn very, very slowly as well. And, you know, when I think, you know, what he's achieved since he's been in office, you know, Mdluli is no longer there, Moyane is no longer there, Zwane is no longer in the cabinet, Jiba and Mkhwebi are out, boards of state-owned enterprises have been reconstituted, the special tribunal is set up for civil claims in the SIU, the commissions of inquiry have been established, the special unit in the NPA has been set up. We have a new head of the NPA. We have a new head of SARS.
So there is work being done.
My experience of government is that that's a lot to achieve. It may not sound like a lot, but it's a lot to achieve in that, which is what he achieved in the first year of his office. But that having been said, that until he sorts out the issues in the ANC and demonstrates that he is actually the uncontested leader of the ANC, and until there are prosecutions, he's not going to get the credit.
We need to wrap from each of you. Let's get, what is the role of communities in combating corruption?
Before I go there, I just wanted to rain on the optimism that
We have 1 minute left.
Thank you. Let me just be the one. I hate to be the one raining on the optimism that I think I seem to see prevailing here, because we still have Mononopi heading the Hawks in the Free State, and we know the baggage that she comes with. We still have a national commissioner of police who himself has got some questions to be answered. We've got a police minister whose sartorial elegance is not matched for the crime that we see happening, despite all his utterances. And I think we need to really be careful in terms of being carried away by this euphoria. Clearly,
this is a conversation we'll need to have again on another day, and unfortunately, he's taken the time, but I think we've said sufficient. Thank you so much for making it through this evening. Professor Wandu, thank you so much for your time. And David, thank you so much for making it to the studio tonight. That's been your Unfiltered for today. Join us again next week, Monday, and you're welcome to suggest topics that you want us to tackle on this show. But for now, it's a good night.